أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Uh, After I recorded my first video titled Reform and Its Conditions, respected Sayyid Ali Hor replied to, he made 4 videos around to reply to that video. Though I have issues with the replies he has made, but inshallah, as we go on, we will discuss that. So I've decided now to address some of the issues which he has raised in that video, uh, so that inshallah we can have a very frank and honest dialogue. And thus you notice I've called it Reform, Revivalism and Its Condition, Part 2. Now, if you notice, I've added the word revivalism to it, because this is what the word Sayyid has also used in his lecture. And thus I'm going to use this word and explain also. Now, before we get into our discussion, I would like to appreciate the respected Sayyid for taking out time to respond, uh, at least respond with good akhlaq, alhamdulillah. And I appreciate that very much. Now, if we don't agree on anything towards the end of this discussion, at least one thing I believe we should be able to display to the public, that it's possible to have a dialogue, a conversation, a discussion without accusing each other, without speaking ill of each other. And it's possible to be honest and frank and still have a very good civil dialogue with each other. Okay? So I hope that's at least the minimum result we can achieve out of these discussions. That's point number one. Point number two, the respected Sayyid, I agree with some of the points you have made in one of your videos, that there is a requirement for reform in the communities. There are some practices going on in the community, which again, I believe they're problematic practices. So for example, the video of the convention which happened in Tanzania, you shared that. I believe, yes, it has a lot of problems. Uh, unfortunately, the if I can put it this way, that the religion somehow has been overtaken by the poets now. If you look at the YouTube videos of how much people listen to the poets and how much people listen to the ulama, you can consider and you can understand what's the difference between how much people listen to poets and how much deen is being taken from the poets, okay? So Ayatollah Shahid Mutahari even goes on further, that there's a requirement of reform in every portion of religion. So for example, this is a statement he shares in his encyclopedia, uh, volume 25, page 502. He says, باید اعتراف کنیم که حقیقت اسلام به صورت اصلی در مغز و روح ما موجود نیست. Okay, this is a very beautiful statement to go and sit down and reflect upon. That the Islam which is being presented today is not the real Islam. It's an Islam which has been turned upside down to us. Okay, and unfortunately, we are seeing some of it in our communities, unfortunately. He then goes on to give example about Tawheed, he goes about giving example about Nubuwwah, Imama, and then even some of the akhlaqi understandings also. He says all this has not been presented in the way it needs to be presented. So, yes, we agree. It's not only we agree, the scholars also agree. The likes of Ayatollah Mutahari agree that there is a need to reform. Okay? And I mentioned in the previous discussion that the need of reform is there, but the reform has to be done systematically. And this is where I humbly request you that there are two types of reforms. There's one at the scholarly level and one at the mass and the lay people's level. What I'm interested in is what reformation we need to do at a scholarly and intellectual level. And that is why I'll be sharing evidences with you from the scholars. Okay? Not that the masses are not important, but let's first sort out the first part and then we come to the second part. That's how systematically it's done. Okay, so I would request you from in the future, if there's anything related to the masses and to with the lay people and what the poets do and what the poets say, I don't know, they are not the criteria. At least I'm not interested in that discussion at the moment. I'm interested in a discussion which is very scholarly at the moment, and then we will come at the next stage to the masses. Okay. Now, as an example, I do agree, for example, one of the practices which I believe is problematic in our communities is the whole issue of istighatha. Now, I would like to clarify here that some might misconstrue that, oh, I don't believe in tawassul. No, I'm not talking about tawassul, which I believe in. I'm not talking about istishfa' and shafa'a, which I believe in. I'm talking particularly about istighatha. The definition of istighatha is different from tawassul and istishfa'. Okay? So, yes, it's a problematic uh, practice which is going on in our communities. And I've sat with several scholars trying to ask them about their evidences. None do provide, but they still keep on promoting this practice. Okay? Even though I'd like to clarify, this is where my difference with you, respected Sayyid, goes on, is that you believe istighatha is shirk. I believe no, istighatha is not shirk. For the pure reason that shirk is something which is intrinsically evil. So it doesn't make a difference that in this realm or in the realm of hereafter or in the realm of metaphysics, metaphysical world or the physical world, it doesn't make a difference, okay? Shirk is shirk everywhere in all realms. So Allah is one and one alone. There's no two gods in this. So for example, we can't say there's two gods in this realm and there's no two gods in another realm. No, it's on all in all realms, there's only one and one God only. Okay. So similarly, shirk has to be intrinsically evil throughout. It can't be that at one time it's allowed and one time it's not allowed, and in one realm it's allowed and one it's not allowed. And that is where I disagree that it's not shirk. Yes, I consider it problematic. Now, so I would like to, this is a plea to the scholars who from the mainstream, the so-called mainstream, which again, as I mentioned, I have issues with this terminology mainstream. From the mainstream scholars who agree with these practices to come out and give us the authentic evidences for their belief in this practice or the other practices which are problematic, okay? But at the moment, let's stick to istighatha. Let's come out and tell us that, okay, these are the authentic evidences, and that is why we believe in these riwayats, these evidences, okay? Unfortunately, we are not coming out, the scholars are also not coming out with the, the evidences. So I would request, this was a post shared, because it was shared publicly, I'm sharing it. Brother Zahir, apparently of Nairobi, if I'm not mistaken, he asks the respected Sheikh Nuru that is believing in istighatha shirk, and Sheikh Nuru replies that no, it's not shirk as far as I'm concerned. And we agree with that also, that it's not shirk as I explained. So he goes on further, he says, is istighatha allowed? So Sheikh Nuru turns back and says, yes, it's allowed as per our good number of great scholars, including Ayatollah Sistani. So I'm requesting now the respected Sheikh Nuru that can you please show us the evidence, because we have we have contrary evidence to that, and I will share some of the evidences I have in terms of istifta'at. So do you have istifta'at, or do you have evidences from his books? Okay, this is number one. Number two, come and tell us, where does he say that this is allowed? Which scholars do say it's allowed? What is their evidence? Can you please show us this? Because this is news for me now. Okay, so I've spoken to multiple scholars. There's not much they give out in this regard. So my request to respected Sheikh Nuru is to come out and give us the proof for uh, this, what he's mentioning. Now, so this is what I was saying, that is the evidence I have. This was a question asked in 2015 from the office of Ayatollah Sistani. So the Raqamul Istifta, the number of Istifta is also mentioned up here. The question was asked from Ayatollah Sistani that we hear some of them يقولون بجواز طلب الأرزاق والأولاد من المعصومين عليهم السلام. There's some who say that we are allowed to ask for rizq, sustenance, and children from the Imams عليهم السلام. Why? Because they believe that لأن المعصوم مسلط وقادر على الخلق والرزق بإذن الله تعالى. See, the question is very specific. Okay? The question is being asked is that Allah has given them the power. Has Allah given them the power, and what are they doing? Is it bi'idhnillah? The question is asking Ayatollah Sistani. Then فالمعصوم عليه السلام يحيي ويميت ويخلق ويرزق الناس بإذن الله. And the Ma'asum, because of this power which Allah has given him, he creates, he makes people dead, he gives life, he gives rizq to people with the permission of God. Now the question comes here. هل يثبت التسلط المذكور? Is this power to the Imams proven? This is the first question. The question is asking Ayatollah Sistani's office. وبالتالي يجوز الطلب المذكور, and are we allowed to ask then the Imams or not? Can you see these two are connected? Notice the answer of Ayatollah Sistani. He says, Al-Khaliq wal-Raziq huwa. This is istifta we have. This is a friend of ours who had questioned, and he got this answer from the office of Ayatollah Sistani. Notice, Ayatollah Sistani doesn't go into saying that it's allowed, the Imams have the power. He doesn't go into saying we're allowed to ask them. He says Allah is the Khaliq, is the creator, and He is the one who provides the sustenance. This was in 2015. A recent istifta was asked. These are from, I took it from the Taqreeb website, and it's there. It's there online also for those who want to check it out. This was a group of Arabs apparently, who went to in the presence of Ayatollah Sistani himself in Najaf and asked him this question. And thus you see that there is a stamp also on this istifta. So the question Ayatollah Sistani is being asked is هل القول بأن الإمام علي عليه السلام أو الإمام الحسين عليه السلام هو خالق الأكوان أو جاعل السماوات أو أنه هو يحيي الخلق ويميتهم من الغلو المنهي. Okay? So Ayatollah Sistani is being asked that, is it true that Imam Ali and Imam Hussein are the ones who create this universe, and they create the heavens and the earth, and they're the ones who give life and death and risk and all that? Is it from the ghulu which the Imams prohibited us from? This is the question Ayatollah Sistani is being asked. Notice his answer. He says, Al-Jawab, نعم هو من الغلو الذي تبرأ منه أئمة أهل البيت عليهم السلام. Yes, this is the ghulu that the Imams told us to stay away from. Okay, and they themselves stayed away from. Can you see now? We have these answers from the Marja's office. Now, I don't know where are these opinions of Ayatollah Sistani, which says that we are allowed to ask them. They are the ones who give risk. They are the ones who give children. These are the things which were mentioned in that convention. And Sheikh Noor is also referring to that. Now, we have this istiftahat with us. So can you please share with us, where do you get these evidences from? And if they are contradictory istiftaat now, because we have this istiftaat and you have istiftaat now without evidences, which one do you refer to now? Yeah. Now, Ayatollah Sistani goes on making a very important point, and this is a very important point that وليس منه إسناد الخلق أو الإحياء إليهم في بعض الموارد الخاصة بإذن الله. In some areas, yes, they perform these supernatural acts, like where he gives the example of the prophets in the Quran, mentioned in the Quran. Okay? نظير ما ورد في القرآن الكريم بالنسبة إلى بعض الأنبياء عليهم السلام. Yeah. So notice he's clearly mentioning that it's a something which happens temporarily. It's not something which happens at all time, that you can go ask the Imam at any time you want. No, these supernatural acts take care that they've been done by the Imams in a special occasion only. Okay, it's not done all the time the way the prophets used to do. They used to do it for the sake of proving Islam. Okay, and thus the Imams would do those supernatural acts to prove anything in relation to Islam. Okay, so uh, this is where I request the scholars to come up and explain us that where is this evidence which they are talking about. So yes, respected Sayyid, yes, we agree that some of the issues happening in the communities are problematic, and scholars don't want to come out and speak about it very frankly and honestly. So inshallah, after this video, I hope that they come out and they come and discuss these issues very frankly and openly. But now we come to the videos you have made. As you mentioned in your video that you will be replying very frankly and honestly, and thus you will not be mincing the words. So I'll also not be mincing my words. I'll be responding very frankly and honestly. Okay? So this is where now we start the discussion. Today's discussion is just going to be this issue. With due respect, dear Sayed, I feel that you are ignoring the main points which I've raised in that video, and you're critiquing some of the points for the sake of critiquing only. Okay? The real points you have ignored altogether, or maybe you will reply them later, but I had hoped that you will get into the matter very quickly rather than discussing these minor details which were not very necessary. Okay, and I'll give examples for that also. Now, uh, for example number one, you say that I have bunched you together with the likes of Dr. Surush. You mentioned this in 2 to 3 lectures you have made. You keep on repeating this, that, oh, I have bunched you together with the likes of Dr. Surush. Dear Sayyid, wallahi, with due respect, but I am not bunching you with the likes of Dr. Surush, nor do I consider your reform to be equal to Dr. Surush's reform. One of your questioners also understood this. I don't believe people understood it the way you understood it. Okay? Now, the reason I'm using the word reform for you is because you are using the word al-islah in your channel. Okay? Al-islah meaning what? Reform. Now, if you're calling yourself reformers, then what should I do? So if somebody calls me Ali and then I say, please don't call me Ali. So I said, but your name is Ali. Now you're denying your own name. Okay. Now, I'm calling you reformers because you have called yourselves reformers. Now, you yourself called reformer. Dr. Surush himself initially used to call himself a reformer also. And that is why I use the example also. And I'll quote him also from his book. So when you yourselves use the word reform, so I'm also going to use the same word. Okay. Now you come and complain, why did I not mention the Usuli reformers? Because they themselves don't call themselves reformers anymore. 2 centuries ago, they called themselves reformers. Now they don't call themselves reformers anymore. So they are the mainstream now, apparently. Okay, if we accept this word. If they're the mainstream, they're not calling themselves the reformers anymore. Okay, when they're not calling themselves reformers, why should I call them the reformers? Okay, so observe uh, here. This is Dr. Surush in his earlier stages. This is his first book. Okay, it's been translated in English. Expansion of Prophetic Experience, page number 115. Notice he says that a person who does not earn a living from religion thinks about rejuvenating and reforming religion. That was the purpose Dr. Surush also had in the beginning. Okay. And that's exactly the point we are trying to make. And your questioner also understood it, that when you don't have a clear idea in the mind of what you're doing, then you start jumping from one place to another. So Dr. Surush in the beginning wanted to reform, but where did he end up to? And this is the reason I'm again repeating, and I'll show this again today. And I showed it in your previous videos also, that you pick up and you cherry pick. And that's why I'm saying you didn't go to the real issues where you are contradicting yourself. You're cherry picking riwayats. You're picking up things which you like and you're abandoning things which you like. These are the issues which you are supposed to discuss. Okay. So again, on page 15, again, he says that a neo-rationalist Islam, okay, it is at this critical stage of intellectual maturity that neo-rationalist Islam presently stands, calling for systematic approach to reform, okay, through rethinking the underpinnings of the tradition, something you are also doing. This is the same thing Dr. Surush started with. Okay, so when we compare both of you now, we are not putting you together. We are saying that he called himself a reformer. You also calling yourself a reformer. Others are also calling themselves a reformer. Don't keep this name for yourself. If you don't like this word, choose another word. Okay. Now, further you go. So this is a video you have made. Challenges with the divine Imam narrative response. So this is the response to me. Minute number 5 onwards, you say that we are just saying that you don't have a clear idea of reform. If you're talking about such different people and you're identifying them as all as reformers, and there are those who, including such mutually antagonistic ideologues, okay, then you go on further saying, I don't have an idea of what reform is then. Okay. Then you go on mentioning that but you are not talking about usuli reform. I mentioned why I've not talked about usuli reform, because they don't call themselves reformers anymore. Okay. Now, why have I put them all under one? I will even tell you now. So we are nothing. You go on further. At minute number 6, you say we are nothing like these reformers. Okay. The pseudo reformers. Now, this is where I disagree with you, dear Sayyid. You And whoever you don't agree with, you call pseudo. And whoever you don't agree with, you call pseudo, People would call you also pseudo reformer. Okay? And people have called you that. So don't do the same thing others are doing also. Okay. You discuss your matter, you discuss your evidence. Leave on people to decide what they want to decide on themselves. You don't make conclusions for people that they are pseudo reformers and they're not, I don't know, they are the real reformers. No. Okay. Let's discuss evidences. So now, You go on further by saying these pseudo-reformers, we ourselves critique them, and their conclusions are not based on serious historical research. And then you go on further. Now, here is where I'm interested in. You say that most of these Iranian pseudo-reform in the West, their research is half-baked and they're lacking serious, extensive historical research. Okay, I'm repeating. You are saying these Iranian pseudo-reform. Now, very strangely, again, look at the contradiction you come up with. In the title, in the video you made, the video is called "The Imams as Ulama Abrar, Texts and Evidence." It's there on your channel. One of these Iranian reformers in the West is called Dr. Kadiwar. Now, see the contradiction you have in your, this is where I have a problem with your methodology. 1 minute you will say pseudo reformers. In another video, you don't remember, you had called him Sheikh Dr. Ayatollah Kadiwar. This is what you had used for Dr. Kadiwar at that time. Now go refer to that video and see how many times you have called him Sheikh Dr. Ayatollah Kadiwar. Now these are the same people now you are saying they are pseudo-reformers. Okay? And I'm sure you disagree with a lot of views and opinions of Dr. Kadiwar. Okay? This is where I see the contradiction in you. And thus I'm telling you, let's not judge everybody. These were issues which we were not supposed to discuss. Okay? We were supposed to go into the main discussions. Okay? Now, why did I put all of you reformers in one group? Okay? Now, this is Professor Tariq Ramadan. I don't know if you agree with his reforms also or not. He has a book called Radical Reform. On page number 10, he discusses why we have problems with the definition of reform. Because one of the accusations, one of the things you came up with against us was that we have not properly defined what reform is. The scholars themselves are stuck. What is reform itself? What is the definition of reform? Okay? So notice he says that critics, commentators, observers have been expressing different and sometimes radically opposed views about the meaning of concepts, that of reform in particular. They're opposing views about reform. Reform by itself has not been defined yet. He goes on by saying that about whether such a scholar or thinker could be labeled a reformist or a reformer, there's difference of opinion within the academics themselves. So he goes on to say that we're in a sort of terminological haze in which the meaning of words is so variable that one no longer knows exactly what the discourse about reform refers to. This is exactly what's happening. And that is why when we don't define reform, it's because there's no one definition to it. There are multiple definitions. So if I would have defined one, you would have said, but we don't agree with this, we agree with that. When we define another one, you would say, we don't agree with this, we agree with the other one. Okay? And thus, whoever calls himself reformer, we will discuss them as reformer. Now, look at how Professor Tariq Ramadan defines reform. This is exactly how you define revivalism. He defines it reform, you define it as revivalism. He says the notion of Islah implies bringing the object back to its original state. This is what exactly you call it as revivalism. He's calling it as Islah and reform. Can you see the definitions now? They differ. I don't know why we were supposed to get into this discussion. Okay? So when an object goes back to its original state, when the said object was still considered to be pure and good. This is exactly what you call revivalism. Okay? So I didn't define it purposely because there's no single definition out there. Now let's just quickly go into revivalism. Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid, now again, another reformer who, again, you would call a pseudo-reformer. I personally also don't agree with a lot of thoughts of Nasser Hamid Abu Zaid. He has a book called Reformation of Islamic Thought. Notice when he discusses revivalism, Now, no, you will not agree with his definition of revivalism also. He says, notice, he says that taking India as an example, Shah Waliullah Dehlawi is considered the godfather of revivalist Islam. And I'm sure you don't agree with some of the Sufi thoughts of Shah Waliullah Dehlavi. But he's a revivalist now. So if you want to choose the word revivalist now, you will need to share it with some others who you disagree with. So he goes on to say even the Wahhabis are called revivalists also. Okay. Now, do you agree with the revivalists? No, I know you don't agree with the Wahhabi movement. Okay, but they call themselves revivalists. So if you're not happy with these terms and terminologies and these labels, choose a name for yourself which is unique. Nobody else has used this word for himself. Call yourself XYZ, you know. Then we will have to study your understanding, your definitions, and then come up with our conclusions. Okay? So this was point number one. You just ended up critiquing this issue for the sake of critiquing. There was no need of getting into the discussion. So for the sake of clarity, let me list down a few scholars who I believe as reformers to make you understand that Baba, I'm not bunching these scholars with the likes of Dr. Sarouche. Okay? There are serious reformers, I believe, out there. Okay? I'm mentioning a few. Ayatollah Shaykh Mutahari. Okay? Shaykh Mutahari's publishers have published a book by the name of Muslih Bidar. Muslih Bidar, meaning an awakened reformer. So himself, his publishers themselves call him a reformer. Okay? And he's really a reformer in that sense. Number two, Ayatollah Khui. So somebody might get surprised. Ayatollah Khui is a traditionalist. How come he can be a reformer? No. The belief I have about reform is no, a person can be reformer in a particular area. You don't need to reform everything to be a reformist. No, somebody reforms a part of ijtihad, he becomes a reformer. So Dr. Sheikh Haidar Hubbullah has an article called Al-Imam al-Khui and the Consequences of the Renaissance and the Movement in Ijtihad and the Science of Sanad Criticism. Notice he calls it an-nahza fil ijtihad. That means he started a whole new movement in ijtihad and rijal. Yeah? Thus, I believe Ayatollah Khui is a reformer. Even Dr. Haidar Abdullah also considers him somebody who started a movement which was not there in the Shia world. Okay, and thus the Rijali discussions are something which Ayatollah Khui really promoted it to a level nobody else before him did that. Okay, number three, Ayatollah Sistani. There's a beautiful article, if a person wants to refer to, it's a small article, a cursory glance at Sayyid Sistani's unique ideas in Ijtihad. And I believe these views of Ayatollah Sistani will now show itself in the next generation where the students come up. People are starting to work with his new ideas. He's promoted new ideas totally in Ijtihad. And I believe he's doing reform in his own way. Okay? Ayatollah Yusuf Sani'i, he doesn't need any understanding or introduction. He calls himself somebody who wants to reform. Ayatollah Saleh Najaf Abadi. Now, the reason I mention him is this is where my humble request to you is that who refer to Ayatollah Saleh Najaf Abadi's books, understand the way he critiques issues. The way I disagree with some of his views, but that doesn't mean that you need to go see the way he systematically critiques issues. When he discusses something, he systematically discusses issues. So he's discussed a lot about ilmul imam and some of the issues which you also call it as ghulu. He has discussed it also and has called it ghulu also. But notice the way he discusses it and the way you discuss it. So my reason to bring him up is go and study his understanding, see his methodology, and then you come and understand how scholarly works are done in a proper and systematic methodology. Okay. Number six, Sheikh Dr. Haidar Habullah. Okay, so I had a chance to attend his lessons for a year and a half or something. I really thank Allah for that 1.5 years. Allah, I learned a lot of things from this man, especially when it comes to, I'm not saying I'm a special student, I just attended his Dars Kharij, and Allah, he taught me a lot of things, especially when it regards to methodology. Okay. Uh, he shows how a person should do research. When he discusses one issue, he discusses the Quranic verses first. He discusses all the riwayats then, and then he sees the opposite and the contradictory narrations. He discusses all the views of the scholars, and then he discusses, this is one thing I saw in his understanding, is that he would discuss the evolution and the history of a concept. So, for example, when we were discussing qiyas, he came up with 5 to 6 different understandings about qiyas. We only had one, at least before that, I personally had only one understanding of qiyas before that. But he came and really looked at the whole evolution and history of this word, of this whole concept, and explained us that how did this whole concept evolve in time. Okay, this is how scholarly and methodology, scholarly work can be done. And this is what I'm requesting from you also, that when you're coming, when you want to give fatwas, when you want to give conclusions, let's come up with a proper methodology, which now becomes, you then end up reaching to good and fine conclusions. Okay. So I am sorry, I'm using Zoom and I'm using the free version. So I will stop here and I will put the second, I'll continue in the second part, inshallah. Okay.